Good morning, wee bookworms. Welcome back to our live storytime session here on this page. I hope you had a lovely week. It's really nice and sunny today, so that's really good. We've got we received a note from Belle as well, so I'm going to read this to you now. And we've also received some fairy dust, and then we're going to read a few pages, or the last pages of the Velveteen Rabbit. So yeah, I'm just going to read this to you. And it's a lovely golden sheet. So, why are grumpy gnomes so grumpy? I, the custodian of wee bookworms, am certain that you have heard of our not so lovely neighbours, the grumpy gnomes, before. The grumpy gnomes live in the fairy garden at wee bookworms, just between Mermaid Lake and the Bumblebee cottages. Finn and I love to chase the grumpy gnomes around the garden. Yes, you are right. Chasing after grumpy magical beings doesn't make them less grumpy, but rather grumpier than ever. Sometimes, by accident, we step onto their long white beards. Then their faces turn very red and they start screaming a very high-pitched scream. I'm not going to lie, grumpy and angry gnomes are not easy to deal with. Grumpy gnomes are always grumpy. They are grumpy when the sun is shining, they are grumpy when it's raining, and they are especially grumpy when it's snowing. Not so long ago, they weren't grumpy, but very happy gnomes. We even call them happy gnomes. So why, oh why, are grumpy gnomes so unbelievably grumpy? Well, that's quite easily explained. Grumpy gnomes are so very grumpy because they don't eat their breakfast anymore. Every morning, old Mrs. Honeypot from the Mousy restaurant brings them freshly squeezed orange juice, lovely runny honey, and warm rolls. And absolutely every morning, every single grumpy gnome announces, I don't want to eat my breakfast. Dear Mrs. Honeypot doesn't want to give up. Sometimes she brings them eggs from the local chickens or juicy apples and pancakes. But no matter what, the grumpy gnomes simply don't want to like breakfast anymore. If you ever come across a grumpy gnome, you better leave him alone. Remember, Finn and I can fly as fast as the Butterfly Express. Grumpy gnomes can never catch us. But if you're a brave wee bookworm, you can prepare a nice breakfast for them. Mrs. Honeypot hasn't tried cereals yet. Perhaps grumpy gnomes would like Cocoa Pops? What do you think? There you go. And our magical reading powers fairy dust. Are you ready? Oh, there you go. And as I said, we have read the Velveteen Rabbit a few pages every week for the past sort of, I think, 2 weeks now. And I'm just gonna give you a little summary of what happened. So there's this little Velveteen Rabbit that was given as a Christmas gift to a little boy. And at first the little boy doesn't really play much with the Velveteen Rabbit. The rabbit spends a lot of time in the nursery and wonders about what it means to be real. And he meets a skin horse that lives in the nursery, and the skin horse tells him that he becomes real when he's really, really loved, when he's very worn and sort of, you know, when he's used by a child to play with. And then one day they start sort of like a friendship, the Velveteen Rabbit and the wee boy, and they spend a lot of time together and they play in the garden as well. And one day the Velveteen Rabbit meets some real rabbits, as in real rabbits, and he gets quite upset because he thinks like, oh, I'm not really that real. But then one day the boy announces that he thinks that his Velveteen Rabbit is in fact real, and that makes the rabbit really happy. And last week we also found out that the wee boy got really sick with scarlet fever, and the grumpy gnome, the Velveteen Rabbit, doesn't leave the boy's side. He's with him throughout the entire time, and that's where we stopped. So today we're gonna read the last few pages, and I really can recommend this book. It's so lovely, but you know that. So let's continue. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. Hooray! Thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside. For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. How about his old bunny? She asked. That? Said the doctor. Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once. What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more. And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire. Only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes, growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each morning, each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves, the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too, shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. That was the Velveteen Rabbit. Absolutely lovely. So, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us again. And we're going to be back next week on Saturday at 11:30 with another story. So, hope to see you soon. I think Belle is here somewhere as well. See you soon. Bye bye.